The candy bar form factor for smartphones has been getting quite old, and while we have seen innovation in the last decade for smartphone design, most of it has been in increasing the size of the display to shrink the bezels and have a smaller footprint. But that's not really changing the way that we use our smartphones, and I've been personally hungering for a different way to use my smartphone that can be either more capable or more compact. And so that's why I've been looking to foldables specifically for that reason. Last year, I reviewed the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip, which was a pretty amazing device, but it didn't really change the way that I use my smartphone. Now I've got the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 2, and it's unlike anything that I've used before. I can confidently say that it's not only innovative, but maybe even game-changing. This is ISO, and this is the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 2 review. Now, before we get into it, there have been many very positive reviews on YouTube of the Galaxy Z Fold 2, and many creators last year went so far as to say it was by far their best phone of 2020. That's all great, and I completely agree with them because it is an absolutely incredible phone. So keep that in mind, but I'd like to actually flip the script and talk more about my criticisms of the Galaxy Z Fold 2 and where future generations can be improved. Because while this is awesome, it is far from perfect. So keep that in mind as you're watching the rest of the review. And if you like this video, be sure to get subscribed to see more videos just like this. The Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 2, or the Fold 2 as I'll call it, has all of the markings of a premium design. It has a fully aluminum frame with this big beefy hinge on the sides. It's got a fully glass back and a big camera bump. It's got a fingerprint sensor. It's got a full screen display on the front and an even fuller screen display on the middle, But what might appear like a fully premium design actually falls quite short in terms of feeling like a premium design. Those same metal sidewalls that have this very ridged aluminum finish actually are kind of grating on my fingers. That same thick hinge is actually kind of uncomfortable to hold on to. And most importantly, the same sort of mechanics that allowed for the phone to fold into itself actually lead for a lot of gaps in the phone to not only keep it from being waterproof, but also lead to these edges kind of going into your fingers no matter how you hold the phone. Those same seams are why we prefer aluminum unibody designs in laptops and why we actually care about those seams between the metal frames of your phone and the plastic or glass back. And here, that really matters. So even on the edge that doesn't have the hinge, there is this pretty sharp edge between the seam of the glass back and the metal frame that is really uncomfortable to hold on to. But then, unlike most other smartphones, the Z Fold 2 not only needs a good visual design and ergonomic design, but also a good mechanical design in the way that its hinge operates. Of course, this only occurs for a few other smartphones out there, including the Surface Duo, any of Samsung's foldables, and the LG Wing. All of these phones need to have great hinges in the way they operate, such that you can have a great experience when you unfold or flip them or whatever the action might be. For the Z Fold 2, the action or the process of doing so is the worst part, but the way that it operates and the stiffness of the way that the hinge works is usually pretty good. After 5 months of using this, I haven't noticed any significant difference in the way that the hinge operates. It doesn't feel looser than before, but I will say the act of opening it up and closing it is a little bit more difficult than I would like. Yes, I don't want my phone opening up on its own like this, just like a laptop, but I'd like for the opening process to be a little bit easier since I enjoy using the inner display more often than the outer display. Admittedly, the Surface Duo was quite similar here in that it had a great hinge, but it was a lot more difficult to open up with one hand, whereas the LG Wing and the Z Flip both had significantly better actions in that you could easily open them up with one finger or one hand and then continue using the phone without having to use your other hand. I really enjoy that, and I wish that the Z Fold 2 could somehow find an easier way to open up the hinge. Before we do so though, let's first look at the external display. I really appreciate that Samsung was able to substantially increase the size of this display over the original Fold. While I never personally used the Fold, I really was not expecting that the external display would be all that usable, whereas this is a little bit more serviceable. I appreciate the fact that this display exists, but in reality, the experience of using this display as a true smartphone is not too great. Yes, it has all the same functions, but the tallness of it really leads to kind of a poor experience, to the point where even many applications don't even stretch properly to fit into this design. I would love to be able to quickly respond to messages, send emails, or quickly tweet from this display, but more times than not, I find myself trying to really focus on getting the keyboard right, to the point where I'm always better off just flipping it open and typing with both of my fingers on the internal display. A few extra millimeters on the external display would go a long way in making me actually want to use it. But then there's the internal display, which is larger than any other smartphone display that I've ever used. It is absolutely incredible, and it's a engineering marvel. Just like the way that I was so amazed when I had my Z Flip and I would just open it and close it just to be amazed that you can't actually easily break the display by just folding it in half. The same goes for this, in that sometimes I'll just close it and open it a little bit just to experience what it's like. That is awesome. It is very cool, and it allows me to do things that I would never be able to do with the external display or even a normal smartphone with a big display. But before we get into those use cases, let me first talk about what I don't like about this internal display. You see, a lot of people initially saw the terrible screen protector that was by default installed on the Z Fold 2, and they immediately tore it off, despite Samsung actually telling people to not take it off and have some professional do so. I understand exactly why they wanted to do that. The fact is the screen protector on this device is one of the worst experienced screen protectors that I've ever used. Not only is it kind of crappy feeling in that it doesn't have the same smoothness that most displays do, it also gives the whole display a little bit of film grain that doesn't look very pretty. It feels like you're looking through a screen in order to actually view the display itself. It also doesn't help that it attracts fingerprints, grime, and dust worse than most of the glass displays that I've ever used. And also, over a few months' time, it's actually started to wear out to the point where you can see the bubbles underneath it on the bottom and top of the hinge, to the point where I'm starting to think that I might actually have to take this off. But there's a reason why I didn't, because I am very unlucky when it comes to foldable displays, and the last thing that I want to do is damage this display in the process, or damage the display with a key or something else after the fact. I am very nervous of that, and as a result, I've just kept the display cover on it despite the experience being so bad. But honestly, that's a very small frustration that I have to deal with in getting this massive display and being able to browse the web or browse social media or send an email or view many emails at once the way that I would on a desktop PC on this quite comparable to a tablet display. This is comparable to the way that I would look at an iPad mini in its size, but it has a substantially smaller footprint. Even though I had several tablets sitting around my apartment while reviewing the Z Fold 2, it was actually very difficult for me to force myself to use those tablets instead of just pulling the Z Fold 2 out of my pocket and using it for watching content, browsing emails, or whatever it might be. That is absolutely incredible, and it actually, I think, obviates the need for a tablet for many people. Obviates? Is that the right word? Oh, yeah. Obviates. Nice. I'm also a little disappointed that Samsung put the front-facing camera towards the middle of this side of the display, because it means that watching 16:9 content, you still have the camera cut out in the middle of the content, despite the fact that you can just put it at the corner and then not have it obscure your vision at all. The cameras on the Z Fold 2 were great, but not really outstanding. I found that they're quite similar in quality to my Note 20 series from last year, but it didn't really have any of the extra ability of the Note 20 Ultra in the ultra zoom lens. Instead, you have a pretty standard ultra wide telephoto and standard layout, in that these cameras are good. They take excellent photos, and for most people, you really wouldn't notice the difference between a photo taken by this and the S21 series. But if you really wanted something to have the best cameras in the game, then this probably wouldn't be the best solution. It is helped by the fact that you have the largest viewfinder in any smartphone, in that you can just open up this massive display and get an incredibly large viewfinder, which is really cool. I appreciate this in that you can actually see how the photo is going to come out instead of just viewing it on a tiny little screen. On the other hand, if you try and take a photo just like this, which is almost a very natural way to take a photo, that viewfinder, on the other hand, is very small. And I have trouble figuring out what's going to show up in the image on this tiny little screen. And so I always have to open it up and see the whole picture, which means that taking pictures easily with one hand is a lot more difficult. A few last things to get through before the conclusion. First, in performance and battery life, this has absolutely incredible performance in that it's got a Snapdragon 855 processor, all the RAM that you might need, and it starts at 128 gigs or 256 gigs of storage, which is absolutely more than enough for most people today. Of course, it doesn't have the newest specs, so you might want to wait for the Z Fold 3 if you want that. But I haven't noticed any significant difference in performance between this and my newer S21 series. Then in terms of battery life, this has quite impressive battery life. I was typically getting around 8 hours of screen on time and usually able to use it between a 2-day period. Of course, this is, staying at home, so if I was out and about, that might shrink to a day and a half instead of 2. One of my biggest frustrations with the Z Fold 2 is actually in the fingerprint sensor. It has a side-mounted fingerprint sensor similar to the Z Flip, and while it might be slightly better, it really doesn't matter at this point because I hate it. I really think too often I find myself having to try again and again, having to clean it off because something's wrong with the way it's working, and I fail so many times that I get locked out and have to use my PIN. This happens more often than any under-display fingerprint sensor, any rear-mounted fingerprint sensor, and even Face ID. Sure, Face ID, you can't use it with a mask, which I've already talked about my frustrations on, but I don't know whether I'd prefer that or this, honestly, because I don't like my consistency here. I don't know what a better solution would be for Samsung. If they've already moved on from rear-mounted fingerprint sensors, then an in-screen fingerprint sensor on the outside would be a little weird because you'd have to activate it before you open the device. And on the inside, I'm not sure they actually have the physical space for a fingerprint sensor, or it would work underneath a foldable display. We'll have to wait for the Z Fold 3 to see what happens. My guess is Samsung continues with side-mounted fingerprint sensors until maybe a few years, which is a real bummer for me. And then there's the price. At $2,000, I wouldn't really recommend anyone bought the Z Fold 2 unless they are massive Samsung fans, really wanting to experience the future and have a lot of money burning through their pocket, because that is a quite steep price, but it is something that's incredibly innovative. Instead, if you can find the Z Fold 2 on discount for a more comparable price to high-end iPhone 12 Pro Maxes with a lot of storage, then I think this becomes a lot more palatable for the average person. Yes, it is difficult to recommend foldable phones to anyone because it is still kind of on the edge of a beta product. I have no issues with my Z Fold 2 in that it is completely durable, but there's enough examples of people breaking foldable displays to the point where I think if you really wanted to, you could wait a couple more years before you dive in. But on the other hand, the Z Fold 2 has completely broken my mold of how I think of a smartphone. Because beforehand, I was always switching from my smartphone to my tablet to my laptop based on what was the best mechanism or object or device for doing something. Whereas with the Z Fold 2, I can at least erase my tablet usage completely by just opening it up and using it like a tablet. This means that browsing the internet becomes better. It means that watching content becomes better. Everything really is baked into this single device. And so in buying a $2,000 or $1,500 phone, you are avoiding buying a $300 or $400 tablet, which means that, this becomes effectively a little bit cheaper. I'm extremely excited to see what Samsung has in store for the Z Fold 3, which is expected to be released sometime later this year. Because while the Z Fold 2 wasn't an incredible phone, there were still some shortcomings and it's far from perfect. And thankfully, Samsung continues to push that bar higher and higher. Until that phone comes out, or until something really changes the way that we use our smartphones, the same way that the Z Fold 2 did, then I'm going to continue using the Z Fold 2 as my primary device. Thank you for watching InnoISO. I hope you like this review of the Z Fold 2 and it helps you make a decision on whether it's the right device for you. Let me know down in the comments what you think about the Fold 2, and if you aren't already, be sure to get subscribed for more videos just like this. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.